Select Subcommittee will hold a roundtable today on COVID-19 policies and how the government responded to the pandemic. One topic likely to be discussed is the origin of the virus. After that, the Energy Department recently concluded it came from a lab leak in China. The department made that conclusion based off new intelligence, but with low confidence. Now, the FBI also concluded the virus originated from a lab leak, but here's where it gets a little confusing. 4 other government agencies say it came from natural transmission. The White House says the origin is still being investigated, and one thing that has been consistent here is China's lack of cooperation has made it difficult to get answers.
Do something to strengthen the World Health Organization, then we're going to have to push China to be more active in it and to, of course, be more honest about what happened 3 years ago in Wuhan with the origin of the COVID-19 crisis.
China's foreign minister has said it is highly unlikely, meantime, that COVID originated from a lab leak. So to discuss, Dr. Amish Adalja is a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and an adjunct assistant professor at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. Adalja, as always, thank you so much for joining us here on Morning Rush. How does this new conclusion by the Energy Department change how we are investigating the origin of the virus? And do the different conclusions by the different governments complicate the topic?
It doesn't really change much. It just tells us that this process is still ongoing and that there's new intelligence that's being looked at by various branches of the intelligence community, and they're all sort of looking at it from their own different angle. And now this is the Department of Energy, which runs a lot of national biological laboratories, making a change in their earlier position. I think the point is that it's important to understand how this actually started, and it shouldn't be confusing. This is a process that is very hard. It's very hard not because of our intelligence agencies, but very hard because China has not been cooperating. They've been obfuscating from the very beginning. They don't really want to know the answer either way, whether this came from an animal market or whether it came from a laboratory, because either way, it's something that originated in China. And I think they're really not coming to grips with that. And they're not known for being transparent. This is the same type of issue that happened during the first SARS outbreak in 2003.
And Dr. Adalja, why is it important for us to know the origin?
So if it came, let's say it came from the wet market, from the animal market, then I think we need to understand what the animal is that serves as the intermediate species between bats and humans, because then we can change our interaction with that animal. If it is a laboratory accident, we have to understand, how did that happen? What biosafety lapses were occurring? How should we do this type of research in the future to prevent that from occurring again? Because we are going to need to do research on viruses like that, and some of that is always going to have a risk-benefit trade-off. And I think we need to make sure that we're fortifying our laboratories in a way that this doesn't happen. So either way, I think it does play a role in how we prepare for the next infectious disease emergency.
And while certainly that is the most important part of this process, there also is the controversy over the back and forth over the origins. When COVID first broke out, the thinking, we were told by officials, was that it was not a lab leak. Why was that conclusion written off so quickly?
Well, what happened was that there was kind of a bundling of lab leak and biological weapon together. And there's no evidence that this was a biological weapon or this was intentional. But both of those hypotheses sort of got welded into one, and that was rejected completely. And then it got kind of through the partisan tribal nature of our society in the United States, and then people got into their own camps, and then it became something that really wasn't about the science or the reality or the truth, but it was about scoring points on whatever tribe was saying whatever side you disagreed with. And that's kind of been the whole story of COVID-19. It's less about science and more about political points, and that's what happened. And I think what happened was that the lab leak hypothesis, which was very different than the biological weapons conspiratorial issue that was going on, got thrown out. And it's taken some time for people to actually come to terms with that those are two different hypotheses, two different issues. And I think this is something that we still need to work on. And President Biden, to his credit, has been pushing the intelligence community to try and come to an answer.
So if you can take out your crystal ball for a second here, what do you think are the chances that we'll actually be able to untangle this and there will be a consensus from U.S. government agencies on the origin?
I think it's very difficult without cooperation from China because we don't know what was going on in the labs in Wuhan. We also don't know what was going on even in the animal market because they cleaned up that whole animal market basically on day one. So we don't have a lot of information. So it may be that it takes years to figure out what actually happened, and maybe we need to have someone that defects from China and actually explains what happened there. That's probably what would happen, and that's sort of how we found out about the former Soviet Union's biological weapons program. It was through defectors. So it's a very tenuous path to actually finding the origin of this virus, but I think it's still important because it's still not the last coronavirus emergency we're going to face.
Yep, scary to think about. Dr. Ramesh Adalja, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Always good to have you on.
Thanks for having me.